You really can't make it up.
It's
I mean,
poison,
I thought
Mr.
it was
Gower.
a joke when I saw it.
I tell you, it's poison, Mr. Gower.
Okay, stop. This is unbelievable.
It's
Make America great again,
anyway.
but try not to die while you're doing it.
It's hashtag Make America Great Again, but you might die.
And it's not our problem.
And we're not responsible.
Okay.
Hey, 4 more years. All right.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure that Morning Joe, the most dishonest, he's a liberal. I mean, he can say he's a conservative, but he switched teams. He just won't admit it. The most dishonest person on MSNBC right now. I'm sure that he had a lot of comments, mockery for the protesters who were gathering by the thousands and thousands and thousands, and the lack of social distancing that was involved in that, right? Oh, no. If you want to gather together in the streets, whose streets are streets occupied? Oh, no, that's a different moment they were using that chant, isn't it? It's almost like this is just the left in a cyclical fashion, unleashing the insanity that is stored up from the mob. Oh, that is kind of what happens, isn't it? People are angry, and this becomes the expression of their anger. And all the celebrities and all the institutions all gather together and talk about how oppressed they are. Meanwhile, they control so much of society. The left has had so much dominance of the institutions of culture, institutions that create a vast amount of wealth and have a tremendous influence. You know, you go on YouTube, for example. YouTube is constantly biased against conservatives. I mean, I'm dealing with this right now as we've launched a YouTube channel. They'll just pull stuff down, and you have to go, why is my stuff being pulled down? I'm doing political commentary. If it's safe for radio and the FCC has no problem, why is it being taken down? Oh, because it violates our terms of service. Then you got to get into what's in the terms of service. And turns out that there's something, about, oh, we don't want people to feel excluded or unsafe or, what does that even mean? Whatever the left says it does. They control the platforms. There are conservative billionaires out there. There are people of tremendous influence who see the world in real terms. Realistically is how they view the world around them. And they could do something really worthwhile about this. But no, let's give more money to bloated DC think tanks to write policy papers that 5 people read by accident on the internet. Let's do more of that. Let's not actually create a place for real free speech where it actually happens. And we don't have to worry about, well, when they're going to pull the plug on that. I'm seeing all these people that are going after now the sponsors on Tucker Carlson show. That's just because he's been effective. He has been a rallying point for sanity on Fox News night after night in the midst of all this absurdity and chaos and lies, all this deception and anger that is being foisted, being jammed down the throats of the American people by the left. Oh, I know some of them like it, but a lot of us don't. And Tucker has been willing to speak truth about this while they're always trying to tell us that we have to just sit and get lectured and deal with all the nonsense. Oh, yeah, sure, there's riots and destruction of property and they're ruining whole neighborhoods. But, I mean, it's mostly peaceful. The people who say this are disgusting frauds. And they're all over the media. And the media is really one entity now. There's conservative media, which is the opposition party to the media. That's the world that we actually live in. There's not a left-right media. There is the media, and then there is this little faction known as conservative media. And if you're in that faction, you push back against the dominant paradigm of left-wing insanity. That's what ends up happening. But they're going after Tucker Carlson right now and saying that, and they're trying to pull sponsors from him. This is not, Tucker's ratings are through the roof. The market shows that people want to watch Tucker Carlson's content, but the left tries to use influence in institutions to shut off the financing for that speech. This is how they play the game. This is why Media Matters and Sleeping Giants and these other organizations that all they try to do is deplatform and shut down conservative speech through slander and lies and just the most disgusting gutter tactics imaginable. The people that work for those organizations and the mainstream media entities that use their stuff are just beyond contempt. They're beneath contempt. But they're going after Tucker's show. I'll tell you this: if Tucker's show ever got pulled from Fox, and I think Fox understands this, the outcry against it would be it would be deafening, and it would not be a smart business move. So I hope, and also it would be such a signal to the rest of us that, okay, so no one's safe to have a real discussion anymore about this. We're told about how oppressed the left is and different factions and different, racial identity groups within the left. We're told how oppressed they are. And yet we can't even have a conversation about it without fear of getting destroyed. They can say whatever they want. The left can say, if you're in the broad spectrum of the left, look at Al Sharpton, an anti-Semite, but he's a black liberal, so he's allowed to get away with that, right? Al Sharpton, who was a part of a hoax that cost a man his life. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. The Tawana Brawley hoax, all swept under the rug. No one cares anymore. Al Sharpton is giving the eulogy at the George Floyd funeral. Al Sharpton has his own show at MSNBC. He's a millionaire. He flies private, and so on and so forth. These are the rules as they are explained to us by reality. They won't admit that these are the rules, but they will tell us that going forward, the rules such as they are going to be in constant flux. That we do know. They're going to be changing things on us. They're going to be switching things up. So with that, I also want to tell you, this is an example of what happens when you try to appease the current moment, when you do everything you can. And just for the record, I had to, if it sounded like I was falling out of my chair there for a second, I got a special visit from Tallulah the French Bulldog in my studio. She managed to come over into the studio space, and then she was running around, so I had to pick her up for a second. So apologies for the pitter patter of little doggy paws on the floor there, but I had to pick her up for a second. So Lady Antebellum, which they have one song that I am familiar with. They have changed their name to Lady A. Because just the evocative nature or the fact that antebellum, is referred to the pre-Civil War South. Just that reference is now unwoke. It cannot exist. And so they have decided to change their name to Lady A, but they've run into a problem. There is a black blues singer, according to Rolling Stone, who for the last 20 years has performed under the name Lady A. And this is just classic. Lady A has now said to the new Lady A, or said about them, quote, "For them not to even reach out is pure privilege." That's right. Does she really think that they did this knowing? I'm sure they just didn't know about this. This was a mistake. They don't want there to be brand conflation or confusion. But another, you change your name so that the woke crowd won't be mad at you anymore. And you fall into yet another problem with the woke crowd. That is the classic moment that we are in right now. They're going after Columbus statues all over. I think the third Columbus statue has now been toppled. And look, I think that we need to understand that they're coming for the founding fathers. I mean, there's going to be a movement. It's just a matter of time to rename. I don't just mean monuments. I mean to rename cities. I mean to rename memorials. I mean to rename it all. Think about how much that will involve. And you'd have to ask, if they don't do that, why? Given what we're seeing about Columbus, they're establishing rules now that people that are in our culture, that are a part of of American history and the American story, that are judged by 2020 standards to have been immoral and wrong and engaged in bad behaviors of all kinds, that they have to be purged from public view and can no longer be celebrated for one aspect of what they did. The totality of the person is up for public debate. In that kind of environment, you'd have to ask, okay, who are we allowed to revere? Who are we allowed to hold up and cherish? So, I don't even think I got into what the problem is that Joe Scarborough and Mika, because they set me off so much. And I'll have to come back and address that at a moment here. What are they mocking? Saying, oh, the rallies are going to cause death. I will address that in just a moment. Okay, so why is everyone all of a sudden talking about the death cult of Trump voters, at least in the liberal media? That's what they're suggesting. That's what they're talking about. Well, it's because the Trump campaign has put out a disclaimer, a waiver of sorts, that if you're going to get tickets for the Oklahoma rally next week, and look, if I could easily get there, I would go. I can promise you that. No question about it. And if it was possible for me, I would go check it out. But I also do think it's important that everyone understand, one, we live in a highly litigious society. People sue each other here all the time. If they think there's a payday that they can get to, if they think there's some way that they can, profit off of pretending that they were wronged in some way, even if it's completely up to their own decision making and it was their own fault, they will do so. But also, I think it's important that the Trump campaign show that, yes, there are risks. That, yes, if you come out, it is possible you will be exposed to COVID-19, and people are able to make the choice as adults as to whether or not they're going to go to the rally. Now, to me, it does seem like it would make sense to hold the rallies whenever possible outside. I would recommend that. Now, I know with weather issues, that can be a bit more challenging, and also perhaps from a Secret Service protection perspective, that may be a nightmare. I never worked on the Secret Service side, so I'm just assuming that that's probably an issue. But people should know that if they are going to these rallies, they're making a decision as adults. They're making an affirmative decision that they are willing to put themselves at some degree of risk from COVID-19. And that this is going to be the world that we're living in going forward. When you go into a very crowded place, there might be people that are there, a person or people who are there who have COVID-19, and you should take some precautions. And if you are if you're a highly compromised immune system, or if you are, over the age of 70, that is there's a risk component that you should certainly take into account as you're doing this. I would also note that this is the kind of stuff that I couldn't even say. You can't even say this on YouTube, I'm finding out. You can't put up these even-handed, honest assessments and analysis of public policy issues because the lockdown consensus is so strong now. It's very much like what we see with climate change, where if you question the orthodoxy, you are screamed at, you are yelled at, you are told that you are a terrible person. And then if you ask for facts to back this all up, you'll be told that just that alone, your request for the information is evidence of your lack of willingness to believe the evidence. So show me the evidence is, well, you don't even believe evidence if you're asking that question. And this is the circular reasoning. This is the absurd way that we are all told to just obey. Up in Boston, I think they just declared a public health emergency of racism. Racism is a public health emergency. Well, this should set everybody a little bit on edge. Yes, racism is bad, and yes, racism exists, right? We always have to go through this initial preamble, or else you become one of the canceled, right? Or as if, and I find it honestly degrading to have to always sit around when we're talking about these issues and say, obviously racism is bad, obviously, but if you don't do that, then the cancel culture comes after you. So these are ways that they're affecting our national conversation. These are the ways they're making you in your own home, talking to people, or in the office, or in any public forum on social media. If you're engaging, you immediately are on the defensive of, well, hold on, because I don't agree with the leftist orthodoxy in its totality, as represented by the Black Lives Matter movement and all of its affiliations, I'm automatically suspect, and therefore I have to say, oh, I'm so sorry about racism. It is terrible. But now can we talk about whether defunding the police is a serious thing to do? Oh, I'm so sorry about the history of racial discrimination in this country. It is terrible, and it is. But now can I talk about what's going on today in this particular context? This is a power dynamic that we have to do this. And it is, it would be a bit like saying, can I discuss, an issue of, and we will later in the show discuss J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter series, and how she's doubling down. I give her credit. She's a progressive lib. And yet she's saying, look, women are real. And to say that being a woman is just a declaration of one's intent to be a woman or something is hurtful and wrong and untrue. And they're coming after her with everything. But before I get into that, if I were speaking about a woman's issue or an issue issue of policy that affects women predominantly, I should not have to always say, I am not a misogynist. I do not believe in hurting women for no reason. I shouldn't. But that's where we are on issues of race. And that is just a fact. That is where we are as a society. If you want to discuss issues of race and you are not a liberal and you are white, you better start every sentence with racism is bad, even though you're acting on the assumption, and we should all be acting on the assumption that we all agree that racism is bad. Of course it is. The same way that we would all act under the assumption as we're having a discussion about women in the workplace, let's say, or about, maternity leave policies. Let's do that. If I'm talking about maternity leave policy, I should not have to do some throat clearing. Well, first, let me just say that women are equal to men, and I reject misogyny, and I reject, domestic violence. Of course I do. Why should I? But you gotta always put these markers in place. That just goes to show you how skewed. It is not a playing field that is leveled for discussion and open ideas. It is skewed against the right in favor of a leftist orthodoxy that's constantly changing, mind you. But the whole point is to keep us all on defense all the time. Got to be on defense. And then you just get tired of it and you do what they tell you you are supposed to do. Eventually you just submit. And that's really the point of it. So, the Trump rallies, I think, are going to be very helpful. I think that it's going to be good for people to see Trump doing his thing. I hesitate to even bring this up, but we all know that there's also a lot of politicians who are older, and COVID puts them at higher risk for their age range. So let's remember that any politician, including the president of the United States, who's willing to go out there is also taking a risk. And that shouldn't be discounted. We should all understand that we are adults making decisions, and none of us are going to live forever. And there is this thing called COVID-19 that's out there that is dangerous to people over 50, particularly dangerous to people over 70. And we should operate with that framework of understanding. And that's what I think the campaign is doing. So the fact that they're also like, oh, it's all so funny. Were they making jokes about all the people that might die from the rallies? There were older people in the rallies, as we know from the guy in Buffalo in his 70s who got pushed to the ground. There were older people in the rallies, too. Were they making jokes about how screaming, I hate racism, and, all this other stuff? Is that worth exposing yourself or perhaps your elderly relatives to COVID-19? No jokes about that, because the media is full of stupid frauds like Joe Scarborough.
No, he's not. He doesn't help anything. As a matter of fact, he has the nerve to call anybody a domestic terrorist. He's the domestic terrorist. He's the one who's been impeached for obstructing justice in this country. He's the one who has friends who are in jail. Roger Stone's in jail. Michael Flynn's in jail. Roger Cohen. Michael Cohen is in jail. He's worried about people in Seattle. By the way, if he wants to do something about Seattle, somebody better show him where it is on the map. I doubt that he even knows where it is. Get back in your bunker. Get back in the bunker.
He's a domestic terrorist. Get back in your bunker. Where is the? Look, I mean, if I had ever read a book, I would throw it at him. But I'm very upset because he's a terrorist.
Now, look, as much fun as it is to do an impression of Joy Behar, which is kind of like a combination of Iago from Aladdin and Dr. Fauci, that as much fun as it is also, I think, sometimes important. Because, yeah, she's a moron, for sure. But she's a multimillionaire TV personality who reflects, the reason she gets paid so well to to do what she does is because there's a bunch of libs in the corporate media that are like, yo, Joy Behar is really spot on today. I mean, the worst people you'll come across in life might in fact be TV news executives, but they think that Joy Behar has really got a lot to add, a lot to say, and she is representative of a pretty widespread point of view, and the point of view is that Trump is basically Hitler, which is where we still are. Nothing has really changed. They've never thought differently about this president since the very beginning of all this, when they were saying that Trump is a fascist. And if anything, now they are more set in that than ever before. The only options for the left, the only options for the Democrats would be to admit that Donald Trump was never a fascist and that they were insane in all the things that they were saying, which they will not do. They're not going to do that. Or to just double down and say, see, it's exactly like we told you. He is a fascist. And find some new reason for that now, and just keep going through this. See, we were right. And then with time, normal people go, hold on a second. He's a fascist because he allowed the states to make their own determinations about a public health matter that was being weaponized from the very beginning by the Democrats against Donald Trump. You're going to say that he's a fascist? If you were trying to establish the ultimate justification for complete state control, which is why COVID-19 has been an irresistible political tool for the Democrats. Climate change is pretty good. Racism as a national emergency is also pretty good. That allows you to get away with a whole lot of state control right away. But a public health emergency over a pandemic, I mean, this is something that the left, they can't find a better circumstance. They can't find a better way to try and seize control of everything and make you do exactly what they want you to do. So Behar is representative of a mentality that,
as dumb as it is, and as much as she's just like, I hate Trump, he's terrible, he's awful, he's like, it's like if Stalin and Hitler had a baby that was ugly, and I saw a photo of it, and I was like, that's an ugly baby from Stalin and Hitler.
As much as all of that is dumb, there are millions of people across the country and throughout the media that largely agree with her. And since we're talking about media consensus, I mean, this is a montage that is making its way around right now, and I wanted to share this one with you too.
Well, if you think you're not racist, you could be right. But in this day and age, that's simply not good enough.
What I did wrong in 2016 is I overestimated white people.
The biggest terror threat in this country is white men, most of them radicalized to the right.
Those white guys, those middle-aged, boring, nerdy-looking white guys.
And white people have been probably woefully late to this conversation.
But I'm not willing to let white voters off the hook.
Do you believe that white folks actually care about racial injustice?
It doesn't appear that we do. I mean, the status quo of our society is racism, and it's comfortable for white people.
Well, because we're white, we have had privilege, even the poorest of us.
I sit here as a privileged white woman. I cannot imagine, but I appreciate you educating us.
Is there any degree of self-deprecation, self-abasement, any degree of groveling that is too much for whiteness? I just want to know. Let's get a little philosophical about this. How much apologizing for privilege am I supposed to do? Is this something I have to do every day, all the time? Am I allowed to have opinions on race relations in this country? And am I allowed to have those opinions without always starting out with, I apologize? I think the answer is no. I have to always, you must first start with the apology. Apologizing for what exactly? For being who I am. It is immoral to demand that people apologize, which is a request for forgiveness and an admission of guilt for something that one has done. I cannot apologize for the first crusade, okay? And I know that we go through all this where people want to go into history and be the ones that say, oh, I can't apologize for the first crusade. I wasn't there. I had no part in it. It had nothing to do with my reality or my existence. But there are people that still want us to be apologizing for things that happened 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago. I mean, look at Christopher Columbus. We're supposed to be apologizing for this. And I would just like to know, if this is now the new standard, where is it too much? Where are we being asked to do too much? And does it ever stop? Will we still be apologizing for the same things that we're being told to apologize for now in 50 years, in 100 years? If we're having a serious philosophical conversation about this country and what it should be trying to achieve, since we're told now it is not acceptable that we have law that is blind to race, and that as a society we overwhelmingly view each other as equals. I mean, there are racists. Yes, I know. I've never denied that. But 99% of Americans are not, in fact, racist. I know that the libs, their heads would all explode. But, 99% of Americans just like people and love their fellow Americans and are trying to go about their lives. And we're all carrying a heavy burden, and we're all doing the best we can. But that's not the country that we're allowed to live in. We have to live in a country where there's a constant apology made by people who are white to everyone all the time. And I would also want to know, why are we just apologizing to the black community in America? Under the lib rules, under the left's formulation here, we should also always be apologizing to Native Americans. We should be apologizing to Asian Americans for the Japanese internment camps, perhaps even for the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We should be why is it that we limit this? What are the limiting principles? They don't have answers. But it's just too much fun to watch all these white liberals constantly just rubbing their hands, going, I'm so sorry. I take responsibility. No, I don't. I don't take responsibility. I don't bend the knee. And that's not going to change. People who are moral and ethical and are people of character understand who they are and will not be swayed by the allegations of the mob that there is a collective guilt that is infused in their personhood. No, I reject that. The media's willingness to bash whiteness and to demand things of white people constantly is appalling. It's immoral. But I know that they're just going to continue to do what they do because it's good for ratings and it makes white liberals feel superior to the other people on the right who do not agree with them about how we should be approaching these problems. So it's not going to go away, but I would just note that they don't have a real argument to make here, because the moment you start to ask real questions, they just shout and go ad hominem and attack you. All right, everybody, we are pleased to be joined right now by Senator Marsha Blackburn of the great state of Tennessee. Senator, thank you so much for calling in.
It is so good to be with you. Thank you so much.
All right, let's talk about where we are now getting things up and running across America. First off, is Tennessee fully open now? And what are you seeing from the federal level as the president says that he won't go into a second lockdown? How confident are you that that's going to be the case going forward?
I have to tell you, Tennesseans are working hard to make certain we don't have another safer at home order. They are abiding by all the protocols. They are making certain that they are wearing masks. They are distancing. They are going back to work in safe ways, and employers are doing a terrific job with being certain that there is PPE for all of the employees, that people are practicing social distancing. And one of the interesting things I found, many of the employers have brought people back in different groups, and they are having some employees continue to work remotely while they reconfigure office spaces and decide exactly how they're going to handle it. And I think people are being very thoughtful. I have not met anyone who says, I want to get COVID, or anyone that says, I want to give COVID to someone else.
Senator Blackburn, are you confident that all necessary procedures will be in place going forward for these rallies to occur in the most safe and secure fashion possible?
I think that for rallies, for sporting events, for concerts, for live venues, you're seeing these groups work together to have conversations with one another and say, how do we do that? Do we want to do a temperature check? Do we want to do a COVID test that is similar to like a breathalyzer or some other way to make a determination if someone does or does not have COVID? So Americans are innovators. They are problem solvers. They're going to find a way to make this happen, to figure out how to keep people safe when they come to their events. Another component of that is that employers want to be sure that they have, and also some of these venue and theme park owners want to be certain there's liability, that if someone gets COVID and they look back where they were a week to 2 weeks back, that they're not held liable for someone saying, well, we caught COVID while we were in your area.
Right. And Senator, how are we doing with PPE, with funding? Treasury Secretary Mnuchin said that there's still plenty of money to be dispersed. I believe this was yesterday, that there's more essentially that the government's going to be able to do to help get the economy going and also to put money in the hands of people who have been so negatively affected by this. Where are we right now on PPE and what's the top of your Senate agenda to try to help get things up and running again?
Well, there is money that is still left in the PPP funds. And there is money there that window is open for businesses until the end of June. And then they're going to have until the end of December to spend those funds. Now, one thing that is being discussed right now is, do you make some of these funds that are left over available to small businesses that were destroyed during the rioting and looting and property destruction that has taken place over the last couple of weeks?
And Senator, is there anything else that you think should be done in addition to the current financial moves from the federal government side? You know, something that you would want to see that would either help your home state of Tennessee or just in general be a real boost to the economy?
Well, there are three things I think that we should do that really don't cost money, but would encourage businesses to get going. Number one is liability protection. And we hear regularly, this is necessary, it is needed. People want to see some form of federal liability protection. That would be a good thing. I tried to address that and get that in place with our Phase 3 bill. But of course, our friends across the aisle did not want that. And it came out. So we're working on it as we look at what comes next. In addition, looking at what we could do with tax credits, the money that employers are spending for PPE for their employees, making certain that there is a credit for that, having a payroll tax holiday for both the employer and the employee, looking at rules and regulations that were not necessary during COVID and saying, let's keep those off the books and not put them back on the books. Now, those are three different categories that would be a savings for businesses and also would put more money in the pockets of individuals. But let's say with tax credits, you could have a cap gains tax holiday between now and the end of the year. And if your business was adversely impacted by COVID or by the rioting, then you would be able to get investors into that business. And when they back their money out, it would come out to them income tax free or cap gains tax free. That's the way that you get this economy growing again and get innovators working again.
And one more, Senator Blackburn, and we're speaking to Senator Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee. Senator, do you see action on the Republican Senate side that would address the issues right now that are being talked about of police accountability and making law enforcement more effective, keeping everyone safe? Is there anything that you want to see happen on that front?
Sure. We had already, back when we did 21st Century Cures in 2016, we put money in for de-escalation training for mental health. And de-escalation training, I think, is something that would be important. We want to make certain that our law enforcement officers have the training and the equipment that they need to keep communities safe. And it was disheartening to me to hear our officers, and my goodness, we need to be investing more in our police force and not defunding the police. But they would say, you know, we didn't have the training necessary for COVID, or we don't have the training necessary for first response for some of the drug situations. We don't have the equipment for that, or we don't have the equipment to handle rioting. These are things we need to be certain that they have. They are the first responders. When you call 911, they are the ones that come to help you, and we want to make certain they're well-trained, well-equipped, because we know they are an integral part of all of our communities.
Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, thank you so much for joining us. All the best.
Thank you. Bye-bye.